Meeting with Personnel Committee to address item 8. What I'd like to do is bring, we have the Chair of Personnel here, Mr. Zine, and also Mr. Rosenthal, the Chair of Transportation. We have a quorum in, I believe, all three committees. Let me see. Yes, we have a quorum in all three committees. So why don't we're going to start off out of order and take, in the joint meeting of the Personnel and Budget and Finance, we'll take item 8 first, and we have no cards on that. But let me, for those that are here, let me also give consent items in the Budget and Finance Committee. Colleagues, if we can concur on items number 9, which addresses the year-end borrowing. Number 11, which is the cheating of funds from the police department accounts. Item 14, which is a planning department ordinance. Item 15, 16, 17, 18 are overpayment items from Department of Finance. So if we can concur on those 7 items. We have 2 cards on item 14 and 11. These are on consent. Do we have Mr. McQuiston? Would you like to speak on those even though they're on consent? All right, just hold on just a second.
My understanding that it was on 14 that the ordinance number is incorrect in the report.
We have the city attorney on item 14. Okay. Well, let's hold 14 then until we check on it. Before we hold those, get those items on consent, let me ask Mr. McQuiston on items 11 and 14. You have a card. If you come up and make your comments, then we can move forward on the...
Jim McQuiston. I have put in statements on both those items, 11 and 14. There is a problem on number 11. The California Code of Civil Procedure says if you want to put those on escheat, it goes to the state rather than to the city. And we've been holding on to those things for quite a long time. I looked in the code just to see if we could, and it says only if it's unclaimed property less than $5 from a parolee, and I don't think we have that kind of person. So I think probably all that money would go to the state if it's cheated, not to the city. And I just want to make sure that that happens. The other thing on item 14, there is a problem. I discussed it in there. Article 13D, both sections 2 and 4 apply there, and both of them say that you have to have an election. And the problem is that if you have an election, there's a delay. Even though the people might approve it, in the meantime, we need the money, and we could get the money in a different way without holding an election, and that's already in the file. So I would suggest that we do that instead. There's about $100 million that we can get that we're not assessing, and it goes on to property tax for collection, so we don't even have to collect it. So the county will collect it for us, and that gets us out of a lot of problems. And so those are my recommendations. They're in the file, and I have sent a copy to the city attorney on both those.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask Dion, I think on item 11, where's Dion? Dion? Yes. On item 11, the issue of whether cheated funds go to the city's general fund versus the state. That's the first time I'm aware of that, and we've cheated literally thousands of dollars from these funds into the general fund. Are you aware of a prohibition of these funds going to the city as opposed to going to the state?
I'm not aware of the issue, and I can get back to you as soon as
Okay,
possible.
all right. If you,
I would say my understanding is that cheatment deals with banking institutions and property tax related issues that go to the state. These are property in the possession of LAPD, and that's what is being as cheated. So it's property. It's not part of a state regulation.
yeah, okay. All right, so do we have the answer on number 14 as far as the proper ordinance?
We're still getting
Okay.
clarification.
It's just,
Mr. Chair,
All right, pardon?
I'd like to pull 14 either way for discussion.
Pardon?
I'd like to pull item 14.
Oh, no, we're
either
not
way
going
for
to move
discussion.
it until we get the ordinance number. So we'll hold 14 on the desk until we get the ordinance number. But if we could go through 9, 11, 15, 16, 17, 18 on consent.
so
So we get, all right, so we move those items. Now we'll go back to the joint meeting with personnel and go to item 8. And while the staff is coming up on item 8, we have 2 cards. If you can come up to the podium, Michael Davies and also Alice Goff.
And for the record, item number 8 are reports from the City Administrative Officer relative to the expanded use of third-party administrator for civilian workers' comp program.
Okay?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Michael Davies, representing Engineers and Architects Association. We also represent senior workers' comp analysts and workers' comp analysts. Thankfully for the city and for the work that needs to be done, the initial attempt to privatize the entire function is off the table currently. What you have before you is a request to allow contractors to do a portion of the work. Unfortunately, in reality, contractors have already been brought on board to do some of this work, and that's the type of activity that doesn't really encourage a great deal of good faith between the unions representing employees and management. The situation is well understood in terms of the shortage of staff. I'm encouraged that additional staffing is going to be provided through this action, but I'd also encourage management to work more closely with the union and our members who are their employees to make the best out of this difficult situation and do what's best for the employees of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, Rita Sharma. Okay, Alice?
Good afternoon, Alice Goff. I'm president of Local 3090. We represent the Workers' Comp Claims Assistance in the Personnel Department. And echoing some of what Mr. Davies said, we would ask that you look at this and live up to the agreement that we have, that being not to lay off employees and then turn around and contract out that work. At this point, we're not sure that it is even cost effective, and all of our history with contracting out has proven it not to be. The work of the current third-party administrator has shown that it's not more cost-effective and does not return injured workers back to work any sooner, contrary to the pilot program of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Program, which has shown a 100% decrease in litigated claims, as well as an ability to return injured workers to their jobs 20% faster, thereby, of course, reducing lost time. This one-year program is just being completed with signs of it really being able to achieve our goals, and so we would ask that rather than go in a different direction, that we continue this program and really make it work to be cost-effective, to return injured workers back to work, getting them the kinds of medical attention that they need in order to be able to perform their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Rita Sharma with AFSCME District Council 36. I just basically want to reiterate what Alice Goff, the president of Local 90, has stated, is that we would like for you to honor the agreement to not contract out or lay off the workers, or even lay off the workers to contract out. We want you to honor your words in the agreement, the letter of agreement. Also, you know, we have been getting a lot of calls from union members in the workers' comp unit stating to us that there are workers from temp agencies and other companies that are there already doing the work. So, you know, the union has not been notified to date, and there are workers, I think up to about 8 to 10 workers that are doing the bargaining unit workers' work. So again, you know, the letter of agreement is not being honored. The union wasn't notified, nor has this committee, unless they have, and we didn't receive the information that before authorization from this committee or from the city council to bring in these workers. And, you know, history has shown that contracting out or subcontracting doesn't always work. It costs more money. The workers don't always go back to work. And, you know, we want you to look at the alternative dispute resolution pilot program that SCIU and the building trades implemented. It has been working. Workers have been returning back to work. And so we want you to really consider that. And please, if we need to find alternative solutions to contracting in or contracting out of our workers, into the bargaining unit. Thank you.
Okay. Let me start off and ask, we have the Personnel Department to come up. And what may help us all is if we can get, although the CAO has done a report dated May the 24th, if you could run through that and give us the highlights, plus particularly if there's anything that is inconsistent with what the council approved in the most recent budget deliberations.
Terry Sauer, CAO staff. Mr. Chairman, what you have here before you is a report back related to the fourth financial status report, where our office had recommended that the Personnel Department be allowed to contract for the services of a third-party administrator. In the case of the FSR, we specifically recommended the Los Angeles County's third-party administrator. Those recommendations were in anticipation of the mayor's proposed budget, which recommended the elimination of 96 filled positions within the Personnel Department's Workers' Compensation Division. Those recommendations were referred back to committee. Subsequent to the release of the proposed budget, the council has restored funding and position authority for 80 filled positions and additional money for approximately $1 million in contractual services to allow the Personnel Department to contract for the claims administration for police and fire civilian employees. We've had some subsequent meetings with the Personnel Department, and in addition to the 80 positions, they've requested the restoration of an additional 6 positions, which we're recommending in this report, to better assist them to manage the claims that will remain in-house. Those additional costs are approximately $438,399. We're recommending that the positions be restored through resolution authority for the next fiscal year. And the Personnel Department has indicated that there may be some savings, additional savings generated through claims management within workers' compensation, and they would use those savings to fund the cost of those positions. We would recommend that we continue to work with the Personnel Department to monitor the savings and recommend transfers through the financial status report as necessary. Additionally, your office had requested that the CAO review the employee relations issues surrounding the proposal to contract. It should be noted that with the restoration of the 80 positions, there will not be any layoffs, and the proposal to use a third-party administrator is to meet the demands, the workload demands created as the result of ERIP and additional attrition in the Personnel Department. Primarily, the workers that would be impacted within the personnel department are the coalition, within workers' comp, are the coalition employees and EAA employees. And in consultation with the city attorney and also with our employee relations division, it should be noted that contracting of coalition work is subject to a meet and confer process, but it does not apply to contracts required for emergencies, and the disputes over these impacts of the contracting out are subject to the coalition's grievance procedure. EAA does not have a, the EAA MOU does not specifically address contracting out, but any disputes surrounding that should be addressed in accordance with the Employee Relations Ordinance. The city attorney has advised us that given the city's emergency declaration, that it's probable that we are able to contract for this work under the ERIP and the attrition. And if there are any additional questions as it relates to either the employee relations or the city attorney portion, we do have CAO and city attorney staff here to answer the more detailed questions.
Okay. Let me ask Maggie, on the current 80 that was restored by the council, how many of those are filled?
80.
All 80 are filled?
Right. Okay. But what was questionable was we had 9 positions that were vacated as a result of ERIP, and then we had 7 other vacancies, so we're really down.
Okay. So that's the overall department, but just in the workers' comp unit?
No, that's in workers' comp.
Okay, go over again now. How many?
We had 9 people who retired as a result of ERIP, and we have about 8 other vacancies on top of that.
Okay, so there's 17. Now, how many are you down in your whole department?
Actually, if we're able to fill the positions that were restored, we are able to work with our third-party administrator to take the workload that is currently not being performed.
Okay, I just want to clarify so I understand. You said the 80 that was restored by the council are currently filled with employees?
Yes.
But then if you look at your 96, that's where the 17 vacancies?
Right.
Okay. All
right. Actually, that would be 16.
Okay. 16. Okay, we got you now. And then on the one area, I'd like the CEO to comment on the $1 million contract for the current expected overflow or work that needs to be done is narrowly defined to deal with public safety civilians. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then on the other issue on reso authorities for the 6 that you're requesting, do you have other reso authorities in the department currently?
Yes.
And how many do you have?
Geez, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I've got quite a few resolution authorities.
Okay, all right. And then it was mentioned earlier, what kind of expectation, you said maybe some additional savings. What do you think that will be and how much, or do you have any idea that from the CAO? I thought you mentioned that as you implement.
The department has indicated, I believe, between $2 and $8 million, but given where we are at this point, we didn't really want to make a transfer from HRB until the fiscal year had actually started and we had some experience.
All right. Mr. Zine, you have any questions on personnel?
Just a few. So the staffing after attrition, ERIP, transfer to special funded positions, and the restoration positions during the budget consideration, you're down how many total?
16.
16 total.
That's
and out of that, how many are supervisors?
We had 12 senior workers' comp analysts. We now have 6.
So
we
you're
are
down
asking
6.
to fill 3.
So you're down 6 supervisors, but you want 3 back.
Right.
Okay. And what impact has this had on the capacity of the supervisors that are existing to do their job?
Oh, the span of control is excessive. Typically, we want to have per supervisor, and these are first-level supervisors, to have teams of about 5 people, and we've doubled up. And given the intricacy of the work in workers' compensation, they do need to have closer supervision, the team members.
The span of control is 1 supervisor to 5 employees?
Yes, but now it's 1 to 10.
And that's because of the detail that's required in the state law, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay, and how has the staffing level work compensation impacted claims payouts?
Well, I can't establish exactly that there's a direct correlation, but we were coming in under budget every month, coming in under $10 million. In the last 3 months, we've been at 12. So
the cost is going up?
Not necessarily. What's happening is that we're not processing the claims as quickly as we need to, and so claims are not moving ahead, and there may be some inefficiencies given the fact that we do not have enough staff and not enough supervision.
So if it doesn't move ahead as scheduled, is there a liability on the city?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's where we find the difference.
That may be part of it.
Okay, so workload transfer of 9 staff positions to a contractor, how many claims does that represent with those 9 staff members?
About 1,000.
So each claims individual would handle how many cases?
Well, the industry standard is 125. Our people now have caseloads of about 165 to 175.
And then will the analysts will an analysis be conducted to compare the work of the contractor versus the personnel department work comp program?
Yes. The personnel department regularly what we call comp stats, all of the work of each of the teams, and we have a pretty good handle on how many claims can be processed and managed. So yes.
So more efficiency with the city employees than with the contractor?
Yes.
And the contractor's doing this for profit, where the city employees do it as a city employee?
That's correct.
And what's the additional budget cost for the positions you're asking for?
It's, Mr. Zine, it's approximately $438,000, give or take.
Okay. So if the future claims payout benefits would cover the cost of the positions, if there's funding available, as we see contractual services and human resources, contractual services account, that can cover this amount through the next fiscal year?
That's correct.
CAO agree with that?
Yes, that is correct.
So it's not going to negatively impact our budget that's already struggling?
That's right.
Okay. And the current third-party administrator, have they been approached to reduce their costs, the contractual costs?
Yes.
As we've done with a lot of different vendors?
Yes.
And what was their response?
Their response was that they would reduce the cost, but they would also have to reduce the service.
And what were they asked to cut? What percent?
10%.
So then they would cut 10% of the work they're doing?
I'm not sure if it exactly figures out to be 10%, but I would assume so, yes.
But
They've
they
got a
said,
bottom line.
we'll take a cut from what we're being paid, but we're also going to be doing less work, whatever percent that is.
That's correct.
So they're not really doing anything except less work.
Yes.
I mean, we've asked some of the vendors and the suppliers to cut their costs to us because of the budget, and I don't know how many have done it. I know the city attorney has gone to some of the contracts they have and asked, cut this a certain percentage, but I haven't heard of them cutting the service at the same time, but they would give them back some of the dollars. Would the city be able to initiate a new RFP for additional caseload, shift to a contractor, and for cost comparison to the existing contractor? Would we be able to do that?
Yes.
So we could initiate a new RFP, and then we could see what else we could get in the private sector. Meanwhile, we can shift, and these people who have these jobs maintain that workforce and get the work done for the claims.
Yes.
Okay, I'll have a motion when I finish, or when this topic is ready for completion.
Let me just clarify one thing before, On the issue, did we clarify who the third party was? Is that it's for the same third party that's currently doing the police department cases, TriStar?
Yes.
Yeah. And also, just as a follow-up on Mr. Zine's question about assessing their cost, would the information be dated on the recent RFP that we selected TriStar from to get an idea of what the going rates are in that business?
You know, my recollection is that in the letter that we received from TriStar, that TriStar had agreed to provide other services, and that these are the services that they have indicated that they will
No, I mean, it's
no longer
when
perform.
we selected them as a provider through an RFP, is that information too dated to go back and see what the field that applied for that contract, what they offered as a cost? Mr. Zine asked a question about what is your sense of what the cost of doing this kind of work? Would that information still be relevant on when we went out to bid and selected TriStar?
I'm
Or is it too
sorry,
dated?
I don't know. I would think that it would be,
Okay.
but I don't know for sure.
What's the annual amount that TriStar receives on this contract?
$10.8 million.
$10.8 million. So if they take a cut, then they're going to be cutting out a certain number of cases that they'd be handling. We don't know what percentage, but, okay, on a $10.8 million contract. This is sworn in civilian or just sworn that we're discussing, both sworn and civilian? Or just?
It was primarily sworn. However, because of the number of people who had ripped out, we have expanded that to be civilians who are in the sworn departments.
Okay. All right, I'll have a motion, but if there's any other,
And that's primarily to deal with this emergency situation. It was not intended that that would be permanent. We would go out to RFP for the additional work.
okay.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, question dealing with ERIP. You have 9 ERIP positions that are being replaced, is that correct?
Yes.
And does that go above our policy then?
I'm sorry, you said replaced?
Yeah.
No, those positions are not being replaced.
None of those are.
The work that they were performing has been moved to the third-party administrator.
Okay, so we're not violating the ERIP policy there then. Question for you, or maybe it's for the city attorney, on the question of emergency and the definition of emergency as it relates to the coalition contract. I would think the definition that they used when they wrote that agreement dealt with an emergency on the part of the city where they needed to get contract employees on the job immediately to do something, not the declaration of a financial emergency per se. It would be dealing with like an earthquake and we need to hire inspectors to do buildings or companies to come in and pick up trash, whatever. Not an emergency where we declare a self-inflicted emergency, basically. I would wonder, I'd like a legal definition of that to see if we really are in the spirit of the contract or not. I would think the unions say we're not in the spirit of the contract. The question is, are we in the spirit of the law?
Right.
So, is there someone from the city attorney's office that can answer that, or?
Oh.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Hanslick, Deputy City Attorney from the Labor Relations Division. The contract doesn't actually define what an emergency is, and what would be more relevant at this point would be the party's intent in agreeing to what the emergency is. I would defer to the CAO to explain, to shed some light on that.
As it relates to this provision was essentially lifted from a previous contract that we have with the Local 721. The provisions of it are almost identical with a couple of minor exceptions. And so, since it was lifted, I think it's more accurately defined as not related to the fiscal declaration of emergency, but more directly on point of you have something that you have to address, and it's a short-term solution, and then you need to move forward under that emergency.
Emergency, well, we declared emergency, and you're saying it's something we have to address. Obviously, we have to address the problem we're having with the third party or with this particular workload. That's a self-inflicted pain, not an emergency per se. And I would, now I'm not a lawyer, not pretending to be, but if there was a failure of meeting of the minds, they thought an emergency was something where you declare an emergency and you have to go out and do some work versus a self-inflicted problem such as a financial crisis. I would think if you think that the definition of emergency was broader, that allows us to use that clause in this case, I would think we should listen to the legal counsel from the union, because I would bet they would argue that that's not what the intent was, nor was it what they thought of when they signed this agreement. And I'm not speaking for the union here, they can speak for themselves, but what little I do know about the law, I don't think we are on very firm ground, in my personal opinion.
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that.
And that may be something you want to go into executive session on, because it could result in a lawsuit.
I think that would be appropriate in terms of, clearly, there's lots of language in all of our contracts, and the bargaining history will speak to what the intention was. In terms of this specific section, as I said, it was lifted directly from a previous agreement, so.
What was the context of the previous agreement it was lifted from?
The previous agreement was, this is a language that came out of Local 721 contract, and it primarily dealt with a period in time where the city was considering contracting out the provision of trash services.
So this is pre-financial
Yes,
issues?
this goes back to post or shortly during the Reardon administration.
And again, then, so we're taking language that had no relevance to a financial emergency, nor was anybody thinking of that when they signed that agreement, that the language you've now lifted and put in here are. So I think, I want to hear from the city attorney maybe in executive session, but I think we're on pretty thin ice here.
I was going to say that I don't think that any conclusion can be drawn without knowing what the bargaining history was of the parties, and I think that's the relevant inquiry here. The language that Tom is speaking of goes to a different emergency than the big emergency declaration.
Right.
I think both of those topics are more appropriately addressed in executive session.
Okay.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Bottom line is, we're not laying off those folks over there, right?
That's correct.
I mean, that's a key question. When I walked in here, I said, it's a great day, and I didn't see too many smiles, and people were saying, well, Bill, and now, of course, you've been able to keep it together, correct?
Correct.
Explain how you did that. Explain what you did.
Outfield.
Magic. Maggie's magic.
Well, we have been working very hard to make sure that the financial issues came to the forefront so that we could realize that while on paper it seemed as though this was going to create a savings, in reality it was not.
Very good. All right, so contracting out will not be at the expense of our city employees.
That's correct.
And number two, you want 6 more people that you didn't have before. Justify those 6.
Well, those are positions
6
that
of
we
the 17,
had.
I mean, yeah.
Right. And these are the positions that we need to supervise the claims analysts as well as to process the claims.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When you talked about the 125 casework for right now, we're at 150 or 175. Are we going to stay at that higher number, or what plans do we, and is this able to do that many, or, how does those statistics work?
Well, we'll work as hard as we can to get the caseload down. And that's where having the third-party administrator assist us with managing and processing those claims that were previously processed by the 9 people who left through ERIP.
Right.
That's essential to this program. However, given the reinstatement of the budgeted positions or the authorized positions within our budget, this puts us in a position to not have to impact the existing workforce.
Great. And then you're going to keep that third party under the looking glass and make sure they earn the money we give them, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, it's all good news.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, so was there originally a cost-benefit analysis done to support contracting out of this service to a third-party administrator?
I think that the cost-benefit analysis was done in relation to the personnel department, was dealing primarily with the 9 employees who had left, whose positions we would not have been able to backfill. Beyond that, I would have to defer to the CAO.
Yeah, I'm probably referring back further when we started this whole process of going to a third-party administrator. Was it based on savings? Was it based on a desire to contract out positions for its own sake? What was it based on?
It was based on corporate capability, for lack of a better way to put it. The personnel department was responsible for the workers' comp administration, and the caseloads were 1 to 1,200. And it was ridiculous, and the only way that the city could get hold of the workers' comp program was to take the sworn out of it, contract that work out to a third-party administrator. That was in the mid-'90s. And we have been operating using this particular paradigm for the last 15 years.
So, but as far as I could tell from this discussion, we haven't found that using a third-party administrator is less costly.
No, we've done some studies. It's been, I think, at least 5 years ago, but we did find that it is less expensive to use the contractor for the sworn cases, and that's primarily because it is less expensive for a private enterprise to be able to provide the services, because they do not provide their employees with the same kinds of benefits. The salaries are comparable, but the benefits are not.
Now, the representatives of our unions argued in their testimony just now to a different effect. I wonder, Mr. Chair, if we could ask if they could come up and give us their justification for that differing point of view.
I didn't hear the first part.
The representatives from our unions had just said that it was more cost-effective to do it in-house.
They did that in
So I wonder if we
comment?
could hear from them at greater length to see what their documentation is for that point of view.
Okay. Let me just say, we just had 3 members, any one particular? We had Mr. Davies, Rita Sharma, or Alice Goff?
I would ask for any of them. I mean, they all testified.
Let me
to
ask
the
you, if
same
any of the
point.
3 are here, if one of you could come up
they're
and if you
still
have
here.
some specifics as to the cost effectiveness of city employees, we'll give you another couple of minutes.
Alice Goff with AFSCME 3090, but I'm going to have Julie Butcher speak to the results of that program, in that the pilot program was run through SEIU 721 over this year's period.
And then,
All due respect, I think you're talking about a couple of different things.
Okay.
I think the cost-benefit analysis, a 1022 finding that it is more cost-effective or more feasible to do the work by contract, has not been currently done on this particular bit of work. We would argue that it should be. The agreement that you reached with us and the language that is now included in every coalition agreement, and we would expect that the city would live up to its word, says that you cannot lay people off to effectuate the contracting out, the privatization of work. That is not tied to any financial emergency. That is not tied to any discussion of a financial emergency other than several emergencies ago when that language was first bargained in the agreement between the unions and the employer. what we suggested is that we should look for the best way to provide this service, the most cost-effective way, the best way of getting people back to work as quickly as possible, be they sworn or civilian. Because for every claim that gets filed a lawsuit as a result of, the city pays forever. So we've worked very hard to reduce the costs of providing a critical, mandated benefit to workers, to get them back to work as quickly as possible. The alternative dispute resolution and workers' comp carve-out is one piece of that and is really antithetical to the approach that you're taking, because that would not be able to be implemented by a third party that doesn't work for y'all. So we think that we provide a better service by doing it in-house at a more cost-effective way that gets workers back to work as quickly as possible. Every expert on workers' comp understands that the quicker people get back to work and treated and healthy, that the less it costs and that the better it is for the service. As soon as people are watching daytime TV and eating chocolate ice cream, the workers' comp rates go up. And so we're very proud of a small pilot that has decreased the amount of litigated claims. That is absolute savings, not only now, but in the future. So we would advocate that we work together to figure out how we provide this service in the best possible way. Appreciate the actions that you've taken to not privatize this work at a time when the folks who are receiving services from your third-party administrators are not happy with those services. You've all heard the police union and the fire union say that that's not the best way to provide this service. Now is an opportunity to actually look at what makes the best economic and public policy sense. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask Julie, could you, before you leave, fill out a card, but also on the material that you've given us just now, have you shared that with the CAO?
Most of it we got from them and have shared with them, and we'll happily say the same thing again and again because...
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, let me just ask, before this comes to council, let me just get one clear. If we can ask the CAO to address the issues that were just brought up about the cost analysis and the pilot, so that we'd have a better framework of addressing it. And then also, when we come to council, if we can have the city attorney prepared, if we go in closed session to discuss this issue of emergency and the current emergency versus the emergency in our past, and the language in what's binding currently or versus when it was written. So if we can ask you to be prepared when it comes to council to address that. Okay. Anything else, Mr.?
Yeah, when it's appropriate, I also have some motions I'd like to make.
Okay, I think the questions we've exhausted. If you have a motion, then Mr. Zine has a motion, and then...
Okay. My motion would be to approve the CAO recommendation on this matter. Also move to initiate an RFP for existing third-party administrator and additional contracted services for work comp.
Okay, that's in addition to TriStar?
Yes.
Okay, a separate RFP, okay.
I actually was looking at a different direction and would like to also have the CAO look at the feasibility of adopting a citywide alternative dispute resolution program, and as well look at the process it would take to gradually bring this entire process back in-house.
Okay. So those are two recommendations. Let me just ask that...
I'll second that one, by the way. I already seconded it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. That we approve this May 24th CAO report, but that I would ask that on addressing the 6 additional positions, that although we're expecting to pay for them through existing our savings, that until, and I think we're going to do it on June the 7th, until this committee has a chance to review the 12 to 1,300 resolution authorities in the city, that we not move forward in hiring those positions. So it'd be a couple of weeks to a month for us to do that evaluation, but that we approve the 6 positions and the funding as authorized, but we not fill them until we have finished the review of resolution authorities citywide. Okay. Any other amendments or comments on number 8? Okay, we'll move that with those recommended additions and also those report backs.
Thank you.
Okay, So now we will adjourn the Budget and Finance Personnel Committee that addressed item number 8, and we'll go and call to order the the Transportation and the Budget and Finance Committee to deal with items 5 through 7.
Report relative to final recommendations for city transit service reduction in fare increases. And in 6 is Board of Transportation Commissioners report resolution draft ordinance relative to LADOT's recommendation to increase fares on commuter express transit services. And item 7 is also the Board of Transportation Commissioners report resolution and draft ordinance relative to LADOT's recommendation to increase fares on DAS transit services. Okay. This is all 3 items.
Okay, and I'd like to have a CAO at the table, because what we need in starting off, after we get the public comment, there are certain things that were approved in the budget, such as the fare increases and things of that nature. I'd like to make sure we're clear what the council's already approved versus what are the specific issues we're addressing today.
Sure.
Okay, but let me start off on, and I'll call up, we're going to deal with items 5, 6, and 7 together. And so if you put a card in for each one, we're going to allow you to speak one time on all 3 areas. Starting off, Betty Harris, and if you come up at the podium and stand, we can do it much quicker. George Harris, Karen Kane, Charles Linderblatt. Let's start off, everybody has 2 minutes.
Okay, yes. Thank you so much. Betty Harris, I live in 856 Wellesley Avenue. I would like to say now is not the time to eliminate the Commuter Express 430 bus, especially with many transportation construction projects underway, particularly work on the Sunset Bridge over the 405 freeway. Parents will be forced to get in their cars and drive the round trip to Loyola, adding to the congestion. New drivers will feel compelled to drive to school, perhaps sooner than planned. Those who are 16 years old cannot take other student passengers, so will have many more cars during construction. This line has already been decimated to just 2 round trips on weekdays, very minimal service. Please don't eliminate it completely, especially for reasons of regional equity. Instead, we need to encourage its use during the freeway construction that will take place for several years. We need to get the word out that a park and drive lot is available for those commuters. If we lose this line, we will have lost an important transit option excuse me, at a critical time when it is needed most. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next.
My name is George Harris, and I'm a taxpayer on the west side. And like all citizens, I'm concerned about the budget crisis that the city faces right now. And I suppose that all the citizens are going to have to make some sacrifice. Now, our community is now served with just 2 express buses downtown, 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. And it's been proposed by some people that we take 100% cut, which I don't think is fair and reasonable. And it's just not fair to the West Side families who pay their taxes and depend on this much-needed service. Thank you.
My name is Karen Kane, and I'm here to speak on behalf of retaining the Commuter Express bus line number 430. This bus line is vitally important to the residents of the West Side. Elimination of this bus line will certainly lead to more crowded freeways at peak traffic times, as well as lengthy commutes and transfers for people working and going to school along the route all the way downtown. The elimination of this line is especially unfair because regional equity is important and has not even been considered by the LADOT in developing their recommendations. LA City taxpaying residents in West LA, Brentwood, and Pacific Palisades should have this very minimal level of service for the tax dollars we contribute to the city that are restricted to transportation services. It is also unfair that LA City should be spending tax dollars generated by city residents to provide commuter express service to areas outside the city and county of Los Angeles. These services should be cut before service within the city is cut. From From a financial standpoint, LA City should be cutting or eliminating LA DOT programs which have the highest subsidies, such as the charter bus program and the community dash lines, before eliminating lower subsidy programs, such as the Commuter Express program that delivers residents to jobs in downtown LA. Furthermore, LA City should account for the impact of increased fares and new Measure R revenue before implementing such drastic and inequitable cuts to service. Now is not the time to eliminate Commuter Express 430, with so many new transportation projects getting underway and causing further congestion. I'd like to strongly urge the Council and the members of the Transportation Committee and the Budget and Finance Committee to retain Commuter Express Line 430. Thank you.
Also come up Judy Litvak, Frank Kazowski, Stephen Lance, Yuval Kramer, and Judy Jacobs. If you could all come up. Yes, sir.
Thank you, committees. My name is Charles Lindenblatt. I'm with the Mid-City West Community Council, Executive Council. However, the comments that I make today are my own, not speaking for the council. I'm speaking about the Fairfax Dash. I appreciate that the recommendation that the Dash be saved and continued. However, I'm concerned about the reduction in service from every 15 minutes to every half hour. A lot of the people who ride the Dash are seniors or elderly and disabled and so forth, and the extra time out in the elements is a bit of concern. So, if you were to reconsider that recommendation, I would suggest possibly having it run 3 times an hour instead of twice. I also, with regards to the Hollywood and West Hollywood Dash, I would urge that that line be saved. I know it's on the list on the borderline of whether to cut or to reduce or to eliminate, and I think that serves varied populations as well, and it fulfills a role in our community, and I would urge that be saved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jody Litvak, and I want to be clear for those of you who know me otherwise, I'm taking time off and I'm speaking as a private citizen today, and I am a regular rider of the Commuter Express Line 430. I am very confused. When we were here last time in committee, we heard several of the council members talk about the need to preserve the Prop A and C dollars for services within the city of Los Angeles. Yet even the revised recommendations by LADOT staff propose to cut commuter express services that are fully within the city while continuing to spend those city-generated Prop A and C dollars to provide service outside the city boundaries and even into Ventura County. I would ask you to make decisions to keep those services within Los Angeles, either make those decisions yourself or direct LADOT staff to come up with recommendations that keep city-generated tax dollars for services within the city before you spend them outside of the city. In addition, as some of the people have already spoken about, those of us who have to travel along or across the Sepulveda Pass are dealing with the impacts of the 405 HOV construction for the next 3 years. It is something we are taking on and we are dealing with because it is a project with regional benefits. But we are all being asked to not get in our cars and find other ways to travel. This is not the time to cut the Commuter Express Line 430. And if we can hang on to it through the end of the 405 construction, there will be many more options available to DOT, not just for the 430, but many of the West Side buses that they run, because by then the Expo line will be open for Phase 1, and there will be many other opportunities to feed service into the Expo line for people needing to get downtown. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Kozakowski. I'm the principal at Loyola High School. I've been there for 32 years, and I'm speaking in support of maintaining bus line 430. As mentioned earlier, I am aware of the budget crisis faced by our city. I'd like to maintain this bus service. As mentioned earlier, it's a minimal service running twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon. I see no viable option for our students taking this bus. One of the complaints about the bus, or one of the supports of cutting it, was the low performing service, the low ridership. While I don't question the research that was done with the school schedule, there are different times that more students ride the bus and others do not. This morning at 7:30, I counted the first commuter bus. We had 20 students get off the bus. I missed the second bus, and I don't know how many rode it total today. But we do have good ridership. At the regional meeting, I made a pledge that I would do everything within my power to advertise this service to our students and our family, and I make that pledge again. I think on a philosophical level, we want to look at a big picture too. I think the future of our city is dependent upon public transportation, and one of the things that we're doing here is we're educating young people about having a positive experience in public transportation. I know my daughter, who rides the bus or the subway from Immaculate Heart High School down to Loyola High School every afternoon. It develops a sense of independence for her. It has started a pattern of behavior that I hope will continue. Let's give these students a positive experience of public transportation. Let's keep their cars off the freeway, as mentioned earlier. I give you my pledge to publicize this, to try to get ridership up. Please don't eliminate this service. Please keep 430. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
My name is Steve Lance. I'm also here as a private citizen, not as an employee of Metrolink. My job today is to talk about something good that just happened. When you read the revised report, you notice at the very back, page 27 of the presentation, that for the next 2 years, there's a surplus. Even before we start to take a look at Measure R, and even before the city is able to claim funds under the federal allocation program of the MTA. That surplus has occurred because of the fare increases and the service cuts. That's $7.3 million. I think we can afford $170,000 a year less, which is what the subsidy for Line 430 is costing, especially when you look at the change that would have to occur should people not be able to get directly downtown or to Loyola without that bus. I took a look at what the alternative routes would be. For Loyola students, it currently takes them about 50 minutes if they start at PCH in Sunset to get to Loyola. Under one alternative, they would take bus line 2 down to Normandy and transfer and get to the school. That would take them 87 minutes each way. If they took the Metro 2 to Westwood, as was suggested, and got on the 431 route, and went downtown, that would take them 80 minutes longer each way. 160 minutes a day for kids who are trying to get through school. Now, if you're a downtown commuter, it gets worse. A downtown commuter currently takes 82 minutes if they start at PCH and go all the way to Gateway. If they would have to take Route 2 and transfer at Temple and Arcadia, which is downtown here, and then walk the 10 to 15 minutes to Gateway, that would take them 155 minutes instead of 82. That's 73 minutes, an hour longer each way. It's
Thank you
worse.
very
I
much.
won't go on. My point has been made. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. Next.
Hi, my name's Yuval Kramer. I'm going to be joining the Mid-City West Board soon again in my area, and the Community Council. But what I came here to ask for is, I've been quite upset. I've followed this process for quite some time, and I'm here to ask that you maintain the service for the Fairfax Dash, not reduce the service. I'm here to ask that you do not eliminate the West Hollywood Dash that not only runs through my district, CD5, but also Council President Garcetti's district as well. And it also goes to the subway. We are still my district is still going to lose a Dash line that was already budgeted for. There were 2 lines that were supposed to start up and were budgeted for and would have had very high ridership, including one in my district and I believe in CD2. that's not going to start up. So we're still going to lose that line. And I'm just asked for fairness. I feel like earlier in the process, this became very politicized. And originally, only the poor lines, the lines were either rated poor, marginal, or good. Only the poor lines were supposed to get eliminated. Then there was picking and choosing among the marginal lines, and then justification after the fact. And I feel that's where it got politicized. The Fairfax Dash is ranked marginal. The Hollywood West Hollywood line is ranked marginal. That should definitely not get eliminated. And I, you know, the local return funds for Measure R, that there should not have been a policy decision to not use those for Dash and Commuter Express. I pay my sales tax. I expect it to be used for bus service as well, not just for rail. I propose that you could raise the rates further than what's being proposed now, to raise them immediately to 50 cents, and then in a year to $1. I would be willing to pay that. Others would as well, to not ride 2 MTA buses and to save time and money, and also to raise the, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Judy Jacobs, and I'm a resident of the Brentwood area. Unfortunately, many of the arguments that I have to say to you this afternoon have already been made, but I will restate them. We pay a tremendous proportion of property taxes and other taxes that are not proportionally represented, do not proportionally come back to us in public transportation. There are no alternatives for these kids and people that are using the bus, no reasonable alternatives. Any bus ride, as you heard, would take upwards close to 2 hours. My son would have to get up at 5 a.m. to get to work, to get to school, and those are the days that he doesn't have 6 a.m. practice. In addition, the carpooling for the boys doesn't work because they have provisional licenses, and the boys have tremendously different schedules depending upon after-school activities, sports requirements, tutoring needs, and other such issues. Again, at a time when the West Side, which is already confounded with traffic, is undergoing a major freeway reconstruction project between Sunset and Sepulveda, it's a nightmare. And we already have amongst the worst traffic in the country between the 10 and the 101. And this would just be not only adding the boys in their cars, but parents who would have to drive back and forth and interfere with their jobs and work as well. I would encourage you to discuss, which I have not heard mentioned, an increase in the fare, which is more doable than a reduction or elimination in this bus route. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just want to mention for the record, Mr. Labange has joined us, and we have a quorum of the both committees. Before we start the questions, if we get the CAO to give us an overview of the council action so we know what's before us. And colleagues, remember, doing budget and finance, the one, although we did not get into specifics, the one direction we did give is that Prop A has to be self-sufficient and cannot, and that should not be expecting general fund subsidy. So that was the only direction we gave on the item. So we got the CAO to give us an overview, and then Mr. Rosenthal will start the questioning.
Angela Berman, CAO's office. During the deliberations on the 2010-11 budget, the committee and council adopted the direct appropriations to departments so that city employees that were funded through Proposition A will receive their funding for the following fiscal year. However, the special purpose fund appropriations were deferred until this time, or until after the budget. So, and additionally, the reserve for the future capital of $15 million was transferred to the UB.
Okay, all right. Mr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, you know, the 430 is in my area, and I will fight to keep that as long as I got breath in my being. And there's several issues for me. One is the geographic equity issue. The regional equity is important. I mean, how else are we going to get people from the Palisades and along Sunset Boulevard and Brentwood downtown if we want to be mass transit? These kids can't get up at 4:35. Their parents can't drive them downtown. It's more gridlock. And the most gridlocked part of the city is right now. And when Thursday, when there was that demonstration in Santa Monica Boulevard there and the cops and everything else, no one could move for hours. I mean, that's literally what we go through absolutely every day. So several questions. One of the speakers talked about we have funding, we can do it. How much money are we looking at by getting rid of this particular route, the 430? I think it's like 160,000 or something like that. What's the number?
About $170,000.
About $170,000, okay. And when you look at the commuter express lines that do provide service to Glendale, Sylmar, Burbank, Thousand Oaks, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, Palos Verdes, Rolling Hills, Pasadena, etc., why are we using the City of Los Angeles tax dollars to provide service to people outside of our city while canceling or attempting to cancel services like the 430?
Majority of the commuter express services that we operate are within the city. There are several services that do operate outside of city boundaries. Many of them are good performing services. They're services that we took over primarily from the RTD many years ago, so we knew when we took them over that they operated outside of the city. A majority of the costs to run these services are coming from the MTA through formula funding, not necessarily city funding. And again, while some of the routes do operate outside the city, it's not always that the origins and destinations of routes are wholly contained within the city of Los Angeles. There was a recent article by David Lazarus, or a series of articles by David Lazarus of the LA Times talking about needing to take a more regional approach to providing public transportation. And again, there are situations where people living outside of city boundaries do want to travel into the city.
No, we love all that, but the point is, what about our people who live in the city, who pay good taxes and have no other way to get from the Palisades but that 430?
Well, why don't we talk specifically about the 430? In our final recommendations, we added a new recommendation that wasn't in the preliminary recommendations that we presented to you a couple weeks ago. We looked at the 430. There is existing commuter express service from the west side. And again, keep in mind that the city of LA is just a small subsection of what is provided in the county. The MTA is the primary transit operator. But there is an existing commuter express route on the west side. It's the Commuter Express 431. They share a common stop at the park and ride lot at the VA hospital. That route, however, does not serve Loyola High School. So what we recommended in our final recommendations would be to take the 431 route and adjust some of the trips to serve Loyola High School. So it will directly serve Loyola High School. People can either take public transit line 2 and transfer to the 431. They can drive to the park and ride lot, as many people do, and get on the 431. They can get dropped off at the park and ride lot, and that route will serve Loyola High School. So in our minds,
we'll go from the 50 minutes to the 87 minutes to 100 and something minutes.
Our analysis of the additional running time compared to the 430 would be about 14 minutes and some additional transfer time. So while it clearly will take additional time, we still think that's a viable alternative for people to use as an alternative to the 430.
Why can't you find the 170,000 or 180 and all of the other way we move things around for this particular one? Because this is a regional equity issue too. If you can get on that bus, especially now, you obviously know that with the 101 and the 10, 405, we're going through major renovation construction. The 3 bridges are the first ones going down, the Sunset Bridge and the others. It's very difficult for my folks in the northern part of the district to get in and out.
I understand. I think you could look at any service that is being affected by these recommendations, and you're going to find a group that uses the service that are going to be impacted. As we talked about at the last meeting, the Commuter Express 430 has a subsidy per passenger of about $13 per passenger. That's $26 per day per person. The average subsidy per passenger on Commuter Express is about $1.50. In this handout that we provided to you, the color handout dated April 2010, you may want to turn to page 10 of that handout.
I mean, you've been trying to kill this line for 20 years, and the people in the northern part of my district have been fighting it for 20 years, be it Marvin Browdy or Cindy Misikowski or Bill Rosendahl. And we're trying to keep a service in place that is convenient for the young kids that
I
take it.
understand. We made adjustments to the route several years ago. It was a poor-performing route back in 1987 when the RTD canceled it. They canceled it because it was a poor-performing service. The city took it over and tried to make it a better route, along with several other routes. Many of those routes did improve significantly under our operation. The 430 really did not. We made some changes several years ago to serve Loyola High School. It improved the performance, but it's still not in our minds sufficient to retain the route. As I mentioned, a $13 per passenger subsidy is extremely high. One other point I want to mention, you mentioned that it's only $170,000. Why can't you just keep it? One of the strategies that we looked at, particularly with the final recommendations, was to go back and see which services we feel we can justify keeping, and to increase the amount of what we call service trimming, where we don't eliminate an entire route, but we reduce frequencies, eliminate Sundays, late evening service. So you'll see in that handout in our report that there are a number of routes that we were able to retain that we felt we can justify retaining, and we significantly increased the amount of service trimming. So there are a lot of recommendations in these final recommendations where we're trimming a little here and a little here and a little here. Each one in and of themselves isn't going to break the bank, but collectively it adds up to a significant amount of money. So while you may argue for the 430 and feel that that's a route that we need to keep, there are probably many other council people that would want to argue to keep the Dash or
No question
citywide in
about
your
it,
area.
and I appreciate that point. But it's the regional equity issue that really takes the super precedence at this particular point. It is the furthest away. It took me years to finally get LAPD to give me a cop, a black and white cop in the Palisades. I now have that because it is further away from where the West LA operation is. And it works. I mean, I got 35,000 people there in the Palisades, and as you go through that whole area there, you're up to 100,000 people at least or more. We have accidents. We have terrible tragedies on Sunset, and there's nothing better for a family than putting that child on that bus and knowing that person is going to get where they need to go. It's already the most difficult part of the city in terms of gridlock, and it just exacerbates the situation. Just one more car on Sunset is one more too many. Versus a bus on Sunset. And that's where I'm doing the balance. It isn't like trimming this and that. I understand that. But the city is a big megalopolis, and people can walk another block or go to another side and get on another bus. There's nowhere to get a bus from when they're up that far in that part of the geography. And that's where the regional equity issues. Help me out with that.
Well, I'll just make 2 points. One, there are many areas of the city where we don't run Commuter Express. As I said, we're not the primary operator in LA City, MTA is. So there are many areas that have never had Commuter Express service. Second, we believe that the 431 modification that we just talked about, where we'll reroute some of those trips to serve Loyola High School, is a viable alternative to the 430 at no additional cost to the city. As I mentioned, about 14, 15 minutes in additional in-bus travel time. It will take longer, but we don't feel that that's exorbitant, that it is a viable alternative in our minds to the 430.
What is your time frame on taking action?
Our goal originally was to try to implement everything by July 1st. As we discussed in the handout that you have, we didn't have a chance to go through that, but based on the size of the cuts that we're making in 10, 11, every month that we delay is about a $2 million loss to the city. We're looking now at August of 2010 for implementation.
Well, I'm going to be very much against it. I'm going to try to see of getting a majority of my colleagues to be against it. But I would like you to take a meeting with part of the leadership team that's in the back of the room, set up a meeting with them. They spoke, and I want you to lay out this new 431 idea. I want you to take their questions, their interaction, and comments, and I'm going to do whatever I can to continue to keep the 430, but give that meeting in the next 10 days or so with them. That's convenient for them, and hear them out more and listen to their ideas and see if you can create some comfort level with them about the 431. I don't think you're going to do it because when you say 15 minutes, I I know what 15 minutes means a half an hour to 40 minutes more, and you're looking at something that will become hugely problematic, and, it's a regional equity issue more than it is anything else at this point. Now, raising rates and stuff like that on Dash, it's 25 cents, might go to 50 in a year. What about the Dash itself as a system and making it more like right now, make it 50 cents and then go to $1, but keep those Dash lines that are valuable to a lot of people as well?
Well, the Dash service is, in terms of the ridership, carries about 28 million out of the 31 million total riders that we carry on our fixed route system. So, in a sense, it's kind of the bread and butter of our transit program. We talked a lot about, what's an appropriate fare increase for Dash. We are currently at 25 cents. We are recommending to go to 50 cents over a 2-year period, 35 cents in year 1, 50 cents in year 2. I think...
what if you went to 50 cents now and didn't cut out any of these other routes like one of these gentlemen were talking about?
It's peanuts.
Well, it's not going to make a huge difference in the overall amount of revenue that we're talking about. The reason that we decided to phase it in was that a majority of the Dash riders that we serve are very low income. And so the concern was to go and directly double the cost. In this economy, we felt that it would be more appropriate to phase in over a 2-year period. So that was the main concern. And then also, Dash serves a very short average trip length. Generally, in the communities, about a mile and a half, and for downtown, less than a mile. So while a quarter does seem like a very low fare, comparing it to MTA on a per mile basis, it's fairly comparable. So we felt that, after a lot of discussion, we felt that phasing it in over a 2-year period made the most sense.
And the last one I have, and I want to go back to the 430 before I do, are all the charters. And the charter buses, frankly, have been the bread and butter for a lot of 501c3s and other community groups, senior groups, and everybody else. Probably next to giving out a certificate to a person, making them feel good about themselves, and we love them, that particular service is dramatically appreciated by so many groups. And I don't want to eliminate that either. How do we keep that going?
Let me first speak to why we're recommending eliminating it. And all the programs that we operate, whether it's Dash or City Ride, Commuter Express, Charter Bus, all serve a valuable function. They're unfortunately, with the size of the shortfall that we're facing, an average of $35 million over the next 10 years, $23 million next year alone, there's no good way to cut the level of service that we have to cut and avoid impacts on the public. With regard to the Charter Bus program, it primarily serves recreational entertainment type trips. They're more discretionary type trips compared to Dash and City Ride, Commuter Express, where we're talking about trips to jobs and to schools and to doctor's appointments and shopping.
We have a lot of children, a lot of seniors, a lot of groups like that use those buses.
Absolutely. And for those that use it, it's a very valuable program, no doubt about it. But I would kind of point to a recent audit by the Controller's Office that you may have seen that audited a number of major contracts throughout the city. One of them happened to be the Charter Bus program. And the recommendation that came out of the Controller's Office, it's actually in committee tomorrow, would be, after looking at the trip destinations for Charter Bus that included Raging Waters and Disneyland and some of these other trips, their recommendation to the mayor and council was that if retaining this service means that other more critical transit programs go underfunded, then their recommendation would be to eliminate this program. So they kind of came to the same conclusion independently that we did. While it is an important service to those that use it, we don't believe that this service, because these are discretionary trips, should be funded, while at the same time we're going to have to cancel services that are needed for our residents in the community. So if we were to retain Charter Bus, it's about a $4.5 million program. That's the equivalent to 4 or 5 additional Dash routes that we would have to cancel. Further, the subsidy on Charter Bus is about $9 per person. The subsidy on Dash is less than $1, and Community Express is about $1.50, so it's a very high subsidy per passenger. Discretionary trips. That was basically our rationale for a while. While it is an important service, we don't believe that it should take priority over the other services that we operate.
No, I appreciate your thoroughness. You've done your homework on this as well. But I would certainly rather charge Dash from a quarter to 50 cents now and go up to $1 eventually and maintain the balance of other critical bus usages, which are senior citizens and kids and groups who do take the bus that helps them in their thing. Now, you're talking about a $25, $35 million shortfall is the figure I heard you say.
We're talking about $23 million next year alone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Where's all the billions of Measure R? Can they not supplement any of this and add anything to it? This is nickels and dimes compared to the Measure R billions we're going to get. These are existing services. These are mass transit. They are interconnected. They help with the gridlock. It would seem to be a basic part of our vein system, of our web system, of our transportation system infrastructure. So why can't we mix a couple of nickels out of that into this ongoing transit infrastructure that we have? I don't like cutting back on transit infrastructure, and then we're going to build a subway to the sea and all these other things when we have on the surface practical transportation, interconnected services that make sense. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? You got 23 million to whatever it is, and you got billions coming in for all the new high-spangled banner stuff?
I don't know that I could have said it any better myself. We have been mentioning Measure R as an option for months and months and months and months. At the last meeting of this joint committee, and then following that council, the decision was made not to use Measure R to help fund Prop A and the transit program, but clearly it is a funding source that is an eligible use.
Well, let's go for it. I want to put a motion on to go review that again and look at Measure R monies and how we can get money out of that. We're not talking billions. We're talking just millions here, and millions in a relative sense for the transportation infrastructure that already exists is important. I disagree with whatever policy we did, and I'd like you to come back with a strategy how we can tap into Measure R money now for these needs. All of your money needs you're talking about. Who are you pointing to?
I'll point to, I'd like to see you probably weigh in on that.
Councilmember David Hirano with the Office of CAO. When you adopted the Measure R budget, you adopted a policy to focus Measure R funds on capital projects, and that...
Let me just comment.
I'm sorry.
When you say Measure R, make sure you comment local return, because it's not the money to the
Yes,
sea,
thank you.
It's local return money, which is far significantly below Measure R.
Yes, sir. It is local return monies. And at that time, we had a sort of almost a glancing discussion about Prop A and its needs. But let me suffice it to say that if you could use Measure R to offset some of the reductions in this Proposition A budget. However, if you do, and you do not take any service reductions now, you face a time period about 2 to 3 years out when all of your Measure R dollars will go to transit at the rate that the transit costs are growing. You will have nothing left to do any of the capital projects on an annual basis, and you will basically be back in this situation again where you're looking at cutting service again. So you could certainly save a few lines or offset the cost of a few lines or 1 or 2 lines here and there, but if you do need to take some reductions in order to avoid being in the same situation 2 to 3 years down.
Well, it seems like
the road.
counterintuitive to me. If transportation infrastructure and mass transit and moving people around is our goal in our great megalopolis, you don't cut back on service for capital dollar expenditures. You find a way to work within that context so you don't rob Peter to pay Paul at this point, and that's what we're doing with what we're doing.
Well, this is certainly a policy decision that your body can make as to whether you want this money to go towards continuing existing transit services, or whether you want this money to go towards building new transportation infrastructure in the city. That's definitely your policy decision to make.
I mean, we can do both if we do it right. Look, we're talking about accelerating Measure R. We're calling it the 30-10 or the 10-30 plan to accelerate in a 10-year period the 30-year plan by getting the federal government to back us up and lend us this and that off of the cash flow we're going to get from that sales tax increase, correct?
Correct, but it's still, as far as I'm aware, it still requires us to participate in it as well. You would be endangering potentially the future of your 3010 program. We would have to look at the exact cuts that you do take and see how that blends with the planned expenditures under the 3010 plan. So you would not want to, I would hope you would not want to offset all the proposed reductions.
What I'd like to do,
there's a happy medium.
Okay, I know
maybe.
Mr. Parks wants it back. What I'd like to frankly do is revisit this in about 6 months with better clarity of Measure R, leave everything alone the way it is now, and see if the Measure R, local match, local this, and whatever else we can figure out to squeeze it out. Because to me, it's counterintuitive that you get rid of a bus line, or you get rid of a dash, or you get rid of some other commuter express because we're going to build a hardware infrastructure for the future. It's the future is now, and our people are suffering now, and the gridlock now is untenable. And so for me, it's a matter of the moment and then planning for the future. And I think we have that flexibility in Measure R, and that's what we should do.
You do have that flexibility. My only other word of caution would be that if you've listened to Mr. Lefton here, this line has a fairly high subsidy, and that if we're to do anything with this line, we should try and find a way to increase the ridership and lower the overall subsidy for this program.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to have a meeting with the community group, and we're going to see where we can creatively take it. But in the meantime, I'd like to put a hold on all of this until we get a better understanding of Measure R and review the whole thing back.
Just to clarify, you said you wanted to maybe put a hold on everything for 6 months. Are you suggesting that we not make we don't implement any of these transit recommendations for 6 months?
I think we need to go down the list depending upon the council members' focus and awareness, but I'm accountable to my constituents, and that 430 means a lot, and it is a regional equity issue. It is something that should be done, in my opinion, and we need to up the cost of a dash ride and these other things to find it. But Measure R, local return money, I would use right now.
I would strongly recommend that the council not delay in implementing the recommendations for the reason that, as I mentioned, $2 million we lose in potential savings for every month that we delay. And what that means is that if we were to reduce the level of service reductions this year below the level that the department is recommending, what's going to happen next year and the year after is that we're going to have to cut everything that we didn't cut in 10-11, plus we're going to have to cut a lot more. So it's in a 2 or 3 year time period, you're going to see a lot more services have to be cut than we're recommending here today. So I want to be perfectly clear that it's imperative that we, A, move quickly to implement the cuts, and B, that we do not reduce the level of cuts, because that's simply going to mean that we're going to have to cut all the services that are on the table today and more in the next year or two. There may be certain services that you feel you'd want to postpone and maybe look at alternative funding, but I think you have to be very wary that for everything that you don't cut, it just means more service needs to be cut in the future.
Yeah. Let me just comment, because I think one of the things for clarity is that, again, Measure R we voted on, and there are very specific projects and very specific dollar amounts that on state legislation mandated, and funds are coming in for those. But I think when we're talking about Measure R, one of the prime, or Measure R local, the prime emphasis was that we not get in the same position we are with Prop A, to where you look up one day and you have a $20-some-odd million shortfall or a $300 million shortfall in the future. And so the view was to use Measure R local return more on one-time costs, that you then could have a budget year to year, that you were not relying on continuous costs. And that was the proposal and the policy we just approved. And I think it's important that when we talk about restoring, we generally should add a sentence as to what we intend to cut to have that restored. Because it's $23 million this year, $300 million for 10 years that we have to address, and there's no subsidy from the general fund. So it's all within Prop A. And so each one of these issues that we're dealing with it's no different than what we're dealing with on layoffs. The longer you wait, the larger the list of layoffs, because you have to cut in a shorter period of time. And so, colleagues, I would hope that we realize that if that cost this program $2 million because we moved it out of the budget hearings and brought it into this hearing, and so we can't start July 1st. And so everybody's going to get some impact on their services, but we can't ignore that we have to find a way to balance Prop A with a $23 million shortfall, just as we addressed the larger budget in the last week. If we kick it down the road, that will just grow, and you will satisfy a bus line for a year, 6 months, a year and a half. But eventually, the larger cut is going to impact the larger amount of our services. So we have to keep in mind that we kept it separately to address the shortfall, but measure our local return. I would hope we not go back and just turn it into a supplement for Prop A, and it disappears, and then there are no projects that get done. And I think we set aside 3% of Measure R Local to assist on the 3010 program. And so if you get rid of that and other things, then 3010 suffers, and any infrastructure that we've been looking at. And so I just want to keep that in context of what we're trying to solve today is how do we save $23 million, not just all the things we want, but what do we replace them with? If you want to leave a bus line, then what are you cutting? Okay,
Mr. Chair, we need more help from the CAO and the CLA to give us a choice. I don't want to eliminate the charter bus system at all. And I want children to go to Disneyland and the Arboretum and Cabrillo Museum and all the places. The more you put children or seniors on systems, it gives them a chance to enjoy it. And if it means Prop R money, I want to have that choice, because the date of this report, April 28th, says further consider the reduction. It said do not eliminate, consider the reduction of the charter bus program rather than eliminate. Now I want to talk about the 430. Where's the 430 sleep at night, James?
We went from 80,000 to...
Where does that, what yard does it come out of?
Yeah, where does it come out of?
City of Commerce.
City of Commerce. Now, why don't we have anything on the west side? Because I'm just saying, if at my high school was John Marshall, and they eliminated the old 78. But what they do is the MTA still comes, and they run what is a Sunset Boulevard bus around the neighborhood by ABC Studios and John Marshall High and back down in the morning and afternoon, and then they return to the main line. If it comes from Commerce, and instead of going out the 10, which they probably do, and going up to Wilshire Boulevard and terminating at the VA, you could go west on the 10 all the way to PCH up to Temescal and go in on Sunset. And I don't think that is $175,000 worth of extra cost for two buses. In addition, could this line run only when there are known dates of school days?
Well, there are also riders that use it to go to downtown.
I know, but let me ask you the question, though. Because I don't know where you went to school, and I walked to school. I didn't have the grades to get into Loyola. Some of my brothers did, but I didn't have it. And although some of them went to St. John Vianney with Bernard Parks, but that's no expression between those two schools. The point being, how did you get to school?
How did I get to school?
Yeah.
I rode my bike.
Rode your bike. What school did you go to?
Granada Hills High School.
Granada Hills High School. So you're in the West Valley, Mid Valley out there, Mr. Smith District, nice big wide streets. It was a good experience to do that. I just think there's a way, this is what, and as Mr. Rosendahl, as the district representative, articulated, there's no alternative. In the core of the city, there's multiple alternatives, whether it's 3rd Street or Beverly or Melrose or Hollywood or Sunset, Wilshire, all the way down to Olympic, etc., Pico. But in this area, there's only one, Sunset Boulevard. So I would suggest, Mr. Rosendahl, if we could somehow direct them to do a study within the next few weeks, how much time does it take to go extra from the PCH? Does it originate at Temescal Canyon? Or does it originate at PCH in Sunset?
PCH.
Well, see if you pick up a little time, because Temescal's right next to Palisades High. Maybe there's a little give there. There's a little stretch there. And I don't know how many people get on at Sunset and PCH, but everybody could gather there. Does that give you an alternative to continue this line as it is? Because I think it's important. And I think it's up to you to try to be a little more engaging in trying to get people out of their cars to these systems. You've been to San Francisco too, right? I don't like our little trolley buses we have. They look like things that come in the mail when you're a kid. I want to see a trolley like they have in San Francisco with tires on it that goes up Beechwood or goes up to the Los Feliz area. So people want to have fun in transit. And I do want to remind you about being a senior citizen or being youth. I think this council is going to say we should find a way to get these children an opportunity or seniors an opportunity to express themselves. I could go with some of the eliminations. I would like to look at some of the multi-city things. And also want to ask you, James, what's the cost to operate the B line compared to the Dash? The B line's a Glendale bus line.
You're talking about the fare for the B line?
What?
The fares?
Yeah, cost of operation. How much difference is a Los Angeles operation than a Glendale operation or a Burbank operation or Pasadena?
The Dash, it's similar to a Dash service, which is about $60, $70 an hour.
You sure it's the same?
I haven't.
I think you should look at it just to see, and I think we should match some of these things. I think it would, if I was in your business, I said where you are, and I want to do it. And I think, especially Mr. Chairs, I don't know the other chair, Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Parks, on the 28th of April in 2010, we adopted a motion, but it didn't call for elimination of this. If I read this right, Mr. CAO, I see the number one man in the number two position over there smiling for a moment there. Item number E, consider the reduction of charter bus. And it also did express itself during public comment that Mr. Rosendahl, Koretz, and Labange called for continuance at the 4:30. That's twice. I think you can figure that out, because they come from Commerce. And then even see if you could find a way to, I know land is very difficult anywhere, but some of these could, just like they do with Metrolink, where the trains sleep at night? They sleep at the other end of the line. They don't sleep downtown. In the day, they're all over on Taylor Yard getting cleaned and washed. So if you found something on the outskirts, maybe we could rent some space in the Santa Monica Blue Brush Yard, or maybe we could talk to the MTA. I don't know if you eliminated that yard yet, Mr. Rosendahl, there, but would you like to see the 430 park there at Venice so it could get closer to your constituents? These are the type of things you got to think outside the box for us to survive this tough economic time. I do agree with some what Mr. Parks said about some of these other ideas. I do agree with Mr. Rosendahl said that we should start increasing the fees now and not wait. Give that a menu, give that discussion to the council to make a vote on it. How many people have you had to force off the bus because they didn't pay? What do you do when someone gets on and they don't pay? You let them ride, right?
Probably.
Right. So, I'm just saying, if you say to folks, $200, the deputy mayor, how are you, Mr. Della? You want to add a little something?
Please.
Yes, sir. Jaime De La Vega, Deputy Mayor. I have a couple things to say. First of all, we continue to support the council's adopted policy on Measure R. That's one. Two, we support LADOT's recommendation as it relates to Prop A and transit service. Let me tell you why. When you look at Prop A and transit service, this is not a budgetary issue that came up overnight. This has been a long-running problem for the city. The city should have acted earlier, and we didn't. The reason we didn't have to act earlier, two reasons. One, we've been using carryover surplus funds from past years to hold off on making tough decisions on fares and service reductions. And the second thing is that the mayor and Councilman Parks was on the MTA board at the time as well. We've successfully secured additional formula funds from MTA for city-run services. So in fact, the deficit here would have been much worse had we not achieved that through MTA. Now, as it relates to DOT's recommendations, the question is not line by line whether any service is good or not. They're all good services. The issue is how this council and mayor spends limited resources, and what DOT has laid out.
Let me ask a question. Wait. Here's the bus that's serving the West End area, 430, and it's got to come from Commerce. Is there a way to get it to park on the west side so it originates from there, as opposed to that? Then you save your time. You're looking for money. This is how it's done.
We have a contractor that runs the service.
I know, but you can get involved and work with the MTA, work with the Blue Bus.
The bus needs to be at the yard where the maintenance takes place, where the dispatchers are.
There's relationships that you could build, James, I think, if we want to try to continue. The point that Mr. Rosendahl made, that Sunset Boulevard, there's nothing north of Sunset till you get to Ventura Boulevard. And there's nothing south of Sunset till you get to Wilshire Boulevard. Is there bus service on San Vicente, Mr. Rosendahl?
Yes, there is.
There's bus service on San Vicente, so to get to San Vicente.
Maybe we could be clear on one thing here before we go too much further. Two observations about the 430. First of all, it's not a bad line in the morning. About 2 trips, about 24 riders each, because that's when Loyola students are going to a school. Now, in the afternoon, what do we have? A total 2 runs, 9, these are daily rides during March when school was in session. 9 riders total for 2 trips, 12, 9, 7, 11, 9, 2, probably a day that school was out of session, 6 and 5. The second trip in the afternoon, 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 1. It goes on for a month. Second issue, there's a perfect, maybe Ms. Lidbeck could come up and talk about the Metro Line 2, which runs all day long and into the evening from Pacific Coast Highway to downtown with a shared stop in Westwood by the Jackie Robinson Stadium.
I understand, but if I had 24 people on a bus, I'd want to keep them on the bus, Phil.
But what are we going to do in the afternoon?
Well, then maybe we could talk to the school and see what their alternatives are to that, because you make a good point there. But anyway, I think when we come to council, Mr. Chair, there's some tough questions. Charter bus is real important, and a few lines are very important. So,
Sorry.
Mr. De La Vega, I cut you off. You want to...
Yeah, if I could just finish, sir, thank you. So, we support DOT's methodology. What they did was they looked at every service that the city council is funding, and they just compared the relative effectiveness of lines. They are not commenting on whether or not any of the lines are good or bad, or necessary or unnecessary. What they're doing is recommending with limited dollars how the council mayor should expend their money, and the mayor supports that methodology. As it relates to line 430 and any of the other proposed cuts, the mayor thinks as a matter of policy, if this council wants to restore service, that's at their discretion. However, we would respectfully urge you to make sure that the order of magnitude of expenditure reductions remains the same as what DOT originally recommended. So Councilman Rosendahl, if you want to restore line 430 either in its entirety or partially, we need to find offsetting cuts somewhere else in the city-funded transit program. There's only so much money. We have to live within our means, and we have to begin doing that.
I got it, and
now.
I count heads at night, and I see where you're reducing the hours, and maybe there's a little more reduction of hours, because sometimes I see 1 or 2 on a 6:37 o'clock dash line. Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn the microphone back. I thank staff for that.
And Chairman Parks, maybe if we could ask Mr. Lefton to review the projected deficits in future fiscal years, because really this is what it gets at. We're trying to save money this coming fiscal year so that the deficits we're facing in future fiscal years are dramatically reduced, and so that we're in a situation where the mayor and council are faced with cutting half of the city-provided transit service in 2 fiscal years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that part of his presentation at T Committee and also material is that the expectation over the next 10 years is over $300 million. And so that's really a significant amount of money, looking at 23 for this year, but, excuse me, 300 over the next 10 years. And so I think it hits right on what you're saying.
I just, if the CLA could look at any options that the council would have as to funding the program, whether it is with the money we get from the advertising and bus benches, or whether options to contribute a little more. Additionally, what is a normal trip cost for the charter program for, let's say, a school from the valley to go to Exposition Park?
It varies.
$500?
$350 to $500.
So maybe there's a 50-50 plan we could have with some schools, or something of this nature here, that we would have to try to do that if that's significant. I think it would, I don't believe our council. Charter.
Okay.
I don't think our council wants to see the charter bus system leave its great goodness that it's created.
Hey, just real quickly, Phil, I really appreciated your numbers that you just gave out, and I'd like you to be with Jim and meet with my community groups in the Palisades and Brentwood. I want to work out a solution that keeps them from getting into private cars to get to where they need to go. It's just adds to the problem. I also truly believe in regional equity issues, even though the cost of it is different than other places. Those folks have rights too. They do pay a lot of taxes and they do engage in the community, and it's an important one. So, and I know that my predecessors kept fighting for this forever. So if you two would take a meeting with the group in the back there and have that discussion and see where that takes us, I'd be happy. Secondly, I'd like to ask the department to go back and give priority to transit services within city boundaries over those outside the city. And if other cities don't like what we're proposing to cut, we should sit down and talk about cost-sharing agreements for services we provide to their residents.
Mr. Grit.
Yeah, over there. Couple questions. One on the city ride services that the city provides and on the similar services that the county provides. Is there an intelligent way that we could look for efficiencies working with the county and the city and Metro to provide those services in some more efficient joint system? Have we ever looked at that, and would that be a viable place to look for some cost savings and efficiencies?
I don't recall that there have been specific discussions. The county runs what's called access services, which is a county-mandated, ADA-required service. It's specifically for persons with disabilities only. They run service through contracts. We run the City Ride program, which actually started a year before access services came into being. Our services are a little broader in that the eligibility is seniors and persons with disabilities. Ours is kind of a supplemental service to the access services program. There may or may not be some potential, something we could discuss with access services.
Yeah, if that would be something we could look at. Obviously, it doesn't have to be done in the context of this year's budget, but it looks like something that could be a potential efficiency. As far as the charter bus system, I don't think we have the financial ability to restore the money to that immediately, but I'd like to see us look at those opportunities and maybe report back in 6 months. To me, that seems more logical, because I don't think we can fund those right now. One of the things I'd look at is to try to limit those services geographically. So perhaps we can focus on sites within the city or within a mile or two of the city. I'm not sure really if we should continue to be paying for trips to Disneyland and other more distant places, frankly. So I think we could still provide some services, but take out the most cost inefficient and most off-base ones and limit it to more essential trips. As far as the one line that's gotten a lot of discussion, I think a lot of the folks that use the 430 are pretty isolated geographically, and I would like to see that restored. I think it's a relatively modest amount of money. I think we could come up with some of the funding for that, at least for this year, by the increase that we had talked about, immediately increasing all dash rides to 50 cents. I suspect that would make it a much more limited reduction. I think we might be able to save a few bucks by limiting the return trip to one bus instead of two. That sounds pretty logical, since the ridership is relatively low on the return rides. So if that would be a substantial chunk of that cost, I think that would make sense. So I would make all of that as a motion. And another thing I would include in that is a significant effort to increase ridership, and that continuing funding the following year might be contingent on a successful effort to increase the ridership of that line. So
we can add those comments in the report. Okay. Let me just, let me just comment on a couple of things. Jaime, maybe you could explain, and I know it's very complicated, this formula issue, and what could happen if you categorically stop providing the commuter express that goes out of the city, how that affects the formula that MTA is providing, and those kinds of issues, and also the issue of how increasing rates of fare may impact your formula to where you could increase it, may lose some of your formula money.
Actually, I'll start, Councilman, then I'll defer to Mr. Lefton. I think he can go into greater detail. In general, the service that the city provides entitles it to a share of MTA's operating dollars. The more service we provide in certain categories, the more money we get. As it relates to fares, I believe we're actually going to increase our formula funding by increasing our fares. Jim?
Well, with regard to Commuter Express, there's, as we talked about previously, that's the most highly leveraged service that we operate. The program as a whole, when you take into account the FAP funding from MTA as well as user fees, we're only paying about 30% of the cost to run that service. So in general, to the extent that you were to look at eliminating the Commuter Express program, it costs us about $20 million a year in real cost, but for the city, it's only about $6 million a year. So you could cut a $20 million program and really only save $6 million. It's very, very highly leveraged.
No, I think you need to repeat that, because I don't think there's a clear understanding of what the MTA subsidy is and what versus the city, and you could actually lose money and services by cutting services.
Right. I mean, if the idea was let's focus in on eliminating Commuter Express as a way to solve the city's budget situation, you would have to give up $20 million in service, and you would only save $6 million in city costs. So it really, from that standpoint, it's not a service that we're focusing on trying to eliminate.
Okay, that's and Jaime, go ahead.
I think the other issue actually has to do with congestion relief. If you look at traffic congestion is regional. So if you take the San Fernando Valley as an example, if you have a commuter express that's getting people off the 101 freeway coming into downtown in the morning, and that service may originate outside of the city boundary, city constituents still benefit from that congestion relief. Every commuter in the city of LA who uses the 101 freeway benefits from residents from other cities who would have taken that freeway who now take commuter express into a job center within the city of LA.
Yeah, and the other comment I make is that, and we're talking regional equity, and if I heard you correctly, Jim, most of our Dash riders are the poorest of the poor.
That's correct.
Okay, and so if we increase their fees or their fare in order to subsidize commuter express, we're doing Robin Hood in reverse.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to look at raising fares as a way to avoid service cuts, but you have to really be wary of trying to minimize the amount of riders you're going to lose. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. Dash riders are very low income overall.
And also, I think you've told us before, they're low income, and they're generally people that have less options.
Right. We've been to a number of public hearings where we heard from people that rely on Dash. They don't have another way of getting around. They rely on that service to get to their jobs and school and doctor's appointments. So while we may say, let's raise it to 50 cents, let's raise it to $1, I think you have to be wary of the impacts in terms of lost ridership. You can lose a lot more riders by raising fares too high as opposed to eliminating services that are poor performing. And so we tried to strike a balance. I think with the fare increase that we're recommending, we'll get a better idea of how many riders we're going to lose. And so when we get into the next fare increase, we'll have a better idea of just how far we can go. But right now, we really haven't raised Dash fares since we started in 1985. We don't really know how many riders we're going to lose, but the concern is that we could lose many more riders by raising fares too high.
Okay, and then tell us again when the expectation of that increase on Dash.
I'm sorry, what was that?
What was the recommendation for when it would occur?
A two-step approach, go from 25 to 35 cents next year, July 1, and then the following year from 35 to 50 cents. So we'll be doubling the fare in a 2-year period.
Over a 2-year period. Great. Okay. We have any other questions? Colleagues, because of the issues that are confronting us in the dollar value, I would recommend that we move this report as recommended, and that in the interim, as it's going towards the council, if there are recommendations to save or salvage a line, that you come forward with a recommended cut somewhere else, but that we move forward so that we can salvage Prop A. Because if we do not salvage Prop A, many of the investments we've made in prior years could go by the wayside. And we certainly, I would not want us to get in a situation in our effort to salvage it, we make other decisions that could hamper some of our future transportation needs. And so it's sometimes, we, in the last minute of anguish to do something, we will sweep some money that really was intended for something else, and then it deteriorates while we're temporarily fixing this. So I would recommend we move this forward, and if there are recommendations to alter it, that it comes in council with recommendations of where those cuts should come from. But I don't think we could ignore the shortfall for this year in the next decade. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I would make my previous motion as a substitute motion that we pass the item with the change of restoring the 4:30 increase in the fare to 50 cents and making the restoration to the 4:30 with only one evening return trip.
Okay.
I will second that motion for the discussion of this motion as we go forward in the Transportation Committee, which I chair, and that will also then get with the Budget Committee.
Okay.
And I'm also looking forward to the community meeting with the city officials and seeing if we can find a way in which we can have a win-win on this.
Okay. If we could ask Mr. Koretz, add that as a recommendation in the committee report, because the reason for our joint committee is to move this to council, so that we won't be having another committee. So we'll add that as a recommendation, and the council can agree or disagree on that once it's in that report. Okay?
I'd prefer to have a vote on my motion.
Okay, well then we can vote. All right, Mr. Koretz?
Aye, of course.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
No? No. All right. So we have it in the report that is 3-2 on. And I would assume we'd have to figure out the count on the Transportation Committee because there's multiple membership, but at least on the Budget and Finance Committee, we have a 2-2.
I would like to, as far as the Budget Committee goes, I'd like to then move the CAO recommendations as a minority report.
Yeah. All right, so it's on the Transportation Committee, we have, let me get the numbers. What? On the Transportation Committee, we have
It goes 3-1, the other was
3-1 and 2-2. All right? Okay. All right, so we'll move that item with those votes and identify Mr. Smith's recommendation that we move the report by LADOT's recommendation as a minority report. Okay? Any other questions as we move forward on this item? Okay, so we will adjourn the T Committee, Budget and Finance Committee, and thank you very much for that information and with those recommendations and requests for information when it comes to council. Thank you. Do we have an idea when this will come to council?
Excuse me?
Do we have any idea when this will come to 2 weeks?
June 2nd.
June the 2nd. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we'll go back to the Budget and Finance agenda.
For clarification, on items 6 and 7?
We also, I'm sorry, we'll move items 6 and 7, which were the ordinances, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So items 6 and 7 had to do with the fare increases that were being proposed over 2 years. And so are we moving to have...
Should those fare increases on 6 and 7 go with the minority report, being that Mr. Koretz has a recommendation or a motion that alters the fares?
Yes.
So 6 and 7 will go with the minority report. So 5, 6, and 7 will go as the minority report, and as opposed to the recommendation by Mr. Koretz to increase the fares. Okay?
We'll just have to ask the city attorney to make sure the ordinance is updated per the...
For either approach, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so we'll now have adjourned the T Committee and the Budget and Finance. Now we're on the Budget and Finance agenda. And before we get into the full agenda, do we have an answer on item 14?
Yes.
Okay.
On item 14, actually, there was a question for the agenda. Actually, the ordinance number is 180847. That's the correct ordinance number. And there's also a minor technical correction that needs to be added, and we can just ask the city attorney to make that minor correction before it goes to council.
Okay, Mr. Kretz, you had an issue on number 14?
Yeah, number 14, I notice 13 and 14 are similar, but I think 13 picks up the entire cost in terms of the developer paying that entire overhead. 14...
Yeah, 13 is, we haven't called that yet.
Yeah, 14 okay. For reasons that I'm uncertain of, we phase this in, and I'm not sure why we're phasing in eliminating a subsidy to developers as opposed to recognizing our current financial difficulties and saving an additional $850,000 immediately for the ensuing 3 years.
I think the rationale was when that came before council that it was a 2-year study that was done, and the view was that in some instances the fees were so significantly increased that the council made a decision to allow a phase-in period. Because
now, as I understand it, Plum Committee heard this item and passed it unanimously, another item that I had done that called for 100% overhead costs. Yeah. So I would think that committee
was that the surcharge?
I'm not sure if it's considered a surcharge.
No, I mean as far as when you said the Plum Committee, because again, I think they've recently had additional fees added, but when we came up with the overall fee study, that was when the council made a decision to phase in the recommendations of the fee study.
Yeah, in my conversations with developers, I've generally found that particularly if the money saved was kept in that department and allowed for additional staffing, that they generally wouldn't object to what winds up as a relatively modest cost spread out over all the projects of the city, if it meant that their projects were processed a little faster.
Okay. Do we have somebody from planning department? Yeah.
I don't remember the city passing that direction previously. Did we phase it in?
Could you comment on, you were here when we discussed the fee study and the rationale, and then comment on, respond to Mr. Koretz's concerns?
Yes, good afternoon, council members. Eva Yuan McDaniel, Planning Department. When the Planning Department did the full cost recovery fee study, we first came and recommended the full implementation of the fee schedule. And during council discussion in August, and the adoption was for full cost recovery of the direct costs and a 3-year phasing plan for the citywide overhead. And the first year was 0%, which is this current fiscal year. And then second year is next fiscal year will be 50%. And then year after next will be the remaining 50%. And what happened was in April's Plum Committee discussion, and Councilman Koretz's motion was to accelerate the implementation to 100%. The department's report is still for the 50% implementation, but I believe the Plum adopted the motion and recommended 100% accelerated implementation. And I have a copy of a transmittal from Plum to Councilman Park's Budget and Finance Committee dated April 30th, which was to document what transpired in the Plum discussion.
That Plum discussion hasn't come to council yet?
No, that was here, and then after today's Budget and Finance, if adopted, it will move forward to council.
Okay, any other, Mr. Koretz, they cover your issues?
Well, I would just add the comment that original policy was made quite a while ago before I actually was on council, that's over a year ago. I think as we've seen much continuing worsening economic times, to lay off people and continue to provide $850,000 in subsidies to developers, I think would be highly inappropriate at this time, and I think it would make perfect sense to go to full cost recovery immediately. And that's just my suggestion. I'll continue to make that point at full council.
Okay, very good. The issue today, we're dealing with the ordinance, or in fact, when you ask about the package, that was approved in August 2009, so we haven't
Yes.
had quite a year yet gotten to the second phase.
The second phase will start July 1st.
July 1st?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so we can certainly have that as a discussion in the sense of the council. But for me personally, I think one of the issues you brought to our attention on the full cost recovery is that every person that is going through our process is not a developer, that many people are
Correct.
everyday citizens trying to remodel or fix their...
Yes, we have business owners, homeowners.
So it's an issue of individuals that were being hit with 3 successive 15% increases versus 100% increase.
The reason council, I believe that the reason council did a phase-in approach was because over the years, the planning fees were only about 40% recovery, and the city was contributing about 60% with general fund. And because we're now close to full cost recovery, with the exception of some historic properties or single-family homes, there are full cost recovery, and some fees went up significantly. And to kind of reduce the impact on the citizens, council decided to the phase in. And I do understand what Councilman Carez's concern is. That is the shortfall in the city. But the end decision is a council decision. The department's report is for the 50% implementation.
Okay, any other questions? And the one thing on an instruction of on this item, I'd also ask if planning could provide the clerk with some information that gives us some idea of the amount of fees that we have recovered, and if we're on schedule since we've adopted that August 2009 package of increases.
Do you want us to report back on the collection or?
Yeah, the rate, if whether we're hitting projections and whether we're collecting at the rate that we thought, because it's almost a year old that we've been collecting at this new rate.
There was a little bit of delay in the initial implementation, but yes, we'll provide the report back.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Just a point of order. Mr. Koretz, I was coming back from the other side. Tell us what you just said. I caught the end of it.
Oh, well, I was recommending that rather than phase in the elimination of the subsidies to developers and others for the overhead rates of the planning department, that we go right to a full cost recovery of 100%. Basically, it's a policy that we established before we ran into the fiscal difficulties that we've run into this year. And I think in the context of what we've seen with the very substantial shortfall and the laying off of so many folks, that allowing for there to be an additional $850,000 worth of developer subsidies in this time makes no sense. So I wanted us to, rather than phasing it in for 3 years, implement that immediately this year.
I see. Now, your answer, which I'm trying to make sense out of my mind on this issue, is that there are a lot of other people who aren't, quote, developers, unquote, who fit within this category. I know that a lot of people in my community were very upset when they knew they had to pay more for this, that, and the other. Could you tell us how many different entities we're talking about when we talk about this issue?
Planning entitlement cases are for discretionary actions, and it's not large developers. We also have homeowners, small business owners, anyone who is doing something in the city that's not covered by the code. So I can't tell you, Councilman, what percentage or anything specific, but it is a wide range of applicants.
And the phase-in approach was a much more gentle way of, I'm not saying this for a developer, but I'm saying this for a homeowner or some of the other groups as well.
Yes, because instead of, for example, if the overhead portion is $500, instead of $500, it's $250, and the next year we'll implement the remaining $250. So it's a little softened.
One thing I would ask that you publish all that information so that anybody wanting to do whatever they need to do can see that chart and see how the phasing goes and how they're impacted by it.
Yes, all the information is in the planning website.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
If I could just add one more point to that. I just want to point out that, correct me if I'm wrong, single family already pay a lower fee, and historic preservation properties already pay a lower fee.
Yes.
So I would think they are lesser impacted. So I'm not sure policy-wise I see the reason why we would hesitate for a couple of years to charge someone more if they want to remodel a room of their home than we would charge 3 years from now. I don't see why we'd be phasing it in, because for homeowners, they're going to be hit when it happens. So I don't see the difference between remodeling this year and remodeling 3 years from now, except that we're continuing to make this subsidy at a time when the city shouldn't be subsidizing these kinds of activities. We should be taking full freight.
Okay, thank you. On this item, and I have to admit that when I read it initially, I was thinking it was just technical changes, but in talking about accelerating the fees, I have a concern that, and the reason that we hammered out the three-phase approach initially was to be balanced, because we hadn't raised these fees in how long?
Over the years, we had done minor raises like 5%, 10%, but only until we did the full cost recovery fee study that we were able to identify the full cost to process these cases.
Okay.
So we're talking decades.
Okay, and also some of these fees jumped.
Some of the fees jumped quite significantly.
I mean, when you say, in the sense of some of them were well over 100%?
Yes.
Okay, colleagues, on this one, although we initially had it for consent, but I'm glad I've read it in between. But I would be opposed to the acceleration because of all the reasons we discussed during council debate. And so we can go for a vote on the technical changes that do not relate to the incremental cost. I would be supportive, but the incremental cost portion of it, I would not vote for that.
And Ray also mentioned that in our report dated March 16th, we have 11 items of technical technical corrections. Since then, we have identified one significant one, and we would like to add it. It's also a technical change.
Okay, could you give that in writing to the clerk?
Yes.
Do you have that?
We will do that.
Why don't you verbalize it and then give it in writing to the clerk?
Okay. What happened was we identified in section 1901, subsection D, the first item is variance, and we omitted a reference to code section 1224Y, which is the application fee for reduction in off-street parking. And it's a process that requires hearings, and it's in the code indicated that it should be processed as a variance. So we request that committee instruct city attorney to add section 1224Y to this item.
Okay, very good. So we vote on that issue on this moving forward, Mr. Smith.
What are we voting on then?
We're voting on the issue that there's technical amendments, but there's also an acceleration of the cost.
So we're voting on the acceleration.
Acceleration, because
Vote no.
Okay, no on the acceleration, no?
No. Which are we voting on?
On the acceleration.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 3-1 opposed to the acceleration, and we will move on consent the other amendments that were technical in nature.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now what agenda item is next?
We could go back to actually item number 10. which is a controller reserve fund statement of condition and status of all reserve fund loans as of March 31st, 2010.
Okay, this is on the reserve fund status.
That is correct.
Okay.
I believe in the report as of June or March 31st, we have a total of just a little over $68 million in outstanding loans as reported by the controller.
Okay, the one thing, and the reason I held this is that we're showing the, in fact, if you can give us an overview where we would be July 1st of 2009 on the reserve fund, and also I think you show us a cash balance of $191 million as of March 31st. Is that still pretty consistent?
Yeah, per the budget, basically, we are anticipating a year-end reserve fund balance of $127.2 million, based on the actions that council and your committee took during the budget process.
So go over that again, Ms.
Basically, per the budget, that will be adopted by council with the resolution on Wednesday, the reserve fund balance at year-end should be 127.2.
127.
Which is the 2.91%.
Okay. And then let me ask, could we clarify that issue? I think it's a bookkeeping issue regarding special parking revenue in the 19.6 million. Although it shows as a write-off, in effect, that is just a bookkeeping terminology because that money has come forward.
That is correct. In our April 30th report, when we, in our declaration of the special parking surplus for this year, we do have a write-up that sort of explains that technical correction. It deals with the write-up.
All right. And then we will get additional, is this the last report on loans between now and June 30th, or will we get a report, another report this fiscal year regarding the status of loans to the general fund?
Certainly with our year-end FSR that hopefully we'll have before your committee on June 7th, we'll have any updates on outstanding reserve fund loans for you.
Very good. Any questions, colleagues, on item 10? Okay, we've moved that item. Thank you. See, we didn't want to stress out the dead wood.
Thank you.
No, that's what he...
Okay, item 12. This is communication from the mayor, resolution draft ordinance relative to implementing actions needed to transfer environmental affairs department's functions, funds, and staff to
What
other
item,
city.
Ray?
This is item 12.
12, okay. Ray, let me just, before we go to 12, one of the things I'd like to just make a verbal request on our June 7th meeting. I'd like to make sure that we agendize a item to where we bring in the CAO's recommended layoff list, and that we have each department come to the committee and advise us what the status of that list is so that we can ensure personnel department is prepared June 16th to get all of the information that's necessary, and that if the department head has a recommendation to alter that, they must bring us some documented evidence on how they will fund those changes they're recommending. And so we need to make sure that that's done on the 7th, so we're in shape to deal with the layoffs June 16th on the letters, and then as of July 1st.
Okay.
All right, so if we can make that on our agenda item. Okay, next item is what you say?
It was item number 12.
12.
Yes, and this is the communication of the mayor, the resolution and draft ordinance relative to implementing actions needed to transfer environmental affairs department's functions, funds, and staff to other city departments to restructure the delivery of environmental protection services in the city.
Okay, and this, colleagues, this item came to Personnel Committee just recently, and just if you could just, I think we've gotten some clarity. I believe these positions that were in environmental affairs are now being scheduled to go to 4 different locations.
They're scheduled to go to 3 different.
3 different locations. If you could give us that information.
The core of the movement of the functional transfers, and I would think about 80% of the core work of environmental affairs will go into the Bureau of Sanitation under a new office created by Enrique Zaldivar and the sanitation folks that would look at environmental services. The other core function of environmental affairs, which relates to enforcement, which is one of the few enforcement functions that the city has with respect to the environment, will move to the Department of Building and Safety. And the function of the oversight for the Schedule 10 Mobile Source Pollution Reduction Trust Fund, which is a trust fund that is administered through resources coming from the from the AQMD, the South Coast AQMD, will be moved to Department of Transportation.
Okay, and then the mayor's office.
And then the mayor's office will create a mayor's office of Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. And then the director of sustainability will be from one staff from environmental affairs.
Okay. So colleagues, I just wanted to clarify that because I think there may have been some confusion as to where those pieces were going to go. My only request is that the CAO, as we did with Human Resources, gives us an update on FSR as to the progress of this transition. Any other questions, colleagues, on item 12?
Yeah. I have a question. Was there something in here regarding the ERA energy efficiency block grant going to DWP?
Not in this particular, these are ordinances that look at the functional transfers. That particular issue, sir, is, was an issue that came up on Friday at the ad hoc ERA meeting, and this is about the acceptance of the resources, and that will be in consideration for full council next week, or this.
So it's not in this, it's a separate item?
It's not in this one because it's not
Okay.
a part of the functions of
All right, we'll deal with
EAD.
it then.
Okay. Any other questions on item 12? We move those items with that one request for report backs and FSR.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is item 13, which is a Los Angeles Department of Building Safety report relative to proposed ordinance amending sections 98.0402 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code as necessary for full cost recovery and collection of fees assessed for the Department of Building and Safety annual inspection and monitoring program.
Okay.
Plan and Land Use Committee approved the recommendations on May 11th. I think just one note, that the revised fees should be set at the 457 and not the 468.
Thank you. While staff is coming up, Mr. McQuiston, we have one card.
Yes, Jim McQuiston. Building and safety has two separate functions, one of which is, of course, to check building plans and make sure that they supposedly agree with the code, and, of course, cross your fingers because you really can't inspect to see if they were built according to the plans. But the other one is if someone complains about something that's going on in the neighborhood, then they have an inspection function that comes out and checks to see if the property conforms. And my only comment there, of course, I don't disapprove collecting if something is really collectible, and that is that before we established this fund, that was included as part of the property taxes paid by every one, and it is property related. And so I was looking at Article 13D again, and there is a specific restriction on adding to that fee without a actual vote, one way or the other, either by the property owners or by the populace. And that's my caveat here. We're probably collecting twice. People are already paying for this inspection service as part of their property taxes. I'm going to do a little more research on this to see exactly how much is being paid on this, and I haven't completed it yet. But it is one caveat that I have, and I have told the city attorney to also to look at that before we jump in and start doing something unconstitutional.
Okay, thank you. We have the staff give us a brief overview of the ordinance and the issues in this item.
Good afternoon, Frank Bush. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Code Enforcement Bureau. And what is before you is a proposal to increase our annual inspection monitoring program fee by $102 to make it a cost recovery. The information is in the packets that were presented to you. Originally, there was an error that was in the original document that was submitted, and then subsequently we've submitted the correct forms, which is increasing to $457 from $355.
Okay, that was an error in the original ordinance?
It was an error in our original, one of the documents that was presented, so the document was corrected.
Okay.
It had a 468 amount, and that was the incorrect number.
Okay.
This was a lesser amount.
Let me just ask you on, when you did the analysis, is this part of a cost analysis, or is it basically comparative? Because we had that difficulty when you presented, your department presented to us in the past, that was more of a comparative analysis rather than a cost analysis to ensure that it's full cost recovery.
It was a cost analysis of what the actual costs were for providing the service, with the inspectors, the clerical staff, all the support staff to go along with it, and what it was in there, and then adding a component back in for the accounting portions of it and the customer service portions of it, which were eliminated at one point a year or two ago.
Okay. Now, we passed the original ordinance somewhere in September.
Pardon?
We passed the original ordinance somewhere in September 2009.
In 2009, we added some additional types of facilities to it.
Yeah.
That's what was done there.
Okay,
The original, the program originally was called VEIP, which was Vehicle Establishment Inspection Program, and then later on that was in 1990, I believe.
Well, what about the annual inspection? Was
changed in 2006 to the annual inspection program when we added the recycling centers and some of the auto sales. In September, we didn't increase the fee. What we did is we added some types of facilities, types of repairs that weren't in the...
you expanded
we expanded it, basically. We added window tinting shops, smog repair, things like that.
So have we seen any additional inspections since September, and has that shown any cost recovery, or
we have identified those some of those facilities, and we're still working to increase those, and yes, we are collecting more revenue on it.
Have we actually started inspecting the larger group of facilities?
Yes.
Okay, so that's in process now.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and so
sir.
then these fees will catch up
Yes.
with the larger capacity.
Yes.
Let me just, and this is excuse me, a side issue. When we had the budget committee recently, your department came forward with an issue about 80 positions that was discussed. Were you here then?
The 80 positions that were, I'm sorry?
They brought forth a request for 80 resolution authorities. Okay, if you weren't here.
Yeah,
I think that request was actually on the enterprise
Was
fund
that the
side.
enterprise? Are we talking about the
Yeah,
enterprise
these
fund
we're
ones that
talking
were
about
just
general
recently
fund.
here?
Yeah, were you familiar with that?
I've heard about it,
Okay.
yes.
Because what I want to just hopefully give some guidance on that. We did not support that, but one of the things I would hope that the department is doing in that regard is identifying what their level of capacity for work on the enterprise fund, but look at issues such as what their spike in work is accommodated by either contract or 90-day contract, things of that nature, because I'm fearful that if you hire people to hit the peak, you can't get rid of them when the peak goes away. And I think what we've had in the past is we believe the peak was going to continue. And so we need to have something from your department that identifies what the base enterprise fund workforce is going to be, and then how you're going to deal with the spikes without the recommendation to just hire permanent people that go on the payroll that you can't remove once the spike or it levels out. And so we can ask you to look at that and get back with the CAO and give them some idea. That's the main reason that we didn't support the 80 positions, because we couldn't figure out, number one, how are we going to pay for them, and if your spike disappeared, how are you going to reduce the workforce to match your allocation of funds? So if you could work on that and get it to the CAO, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, I'll pass that along. I do know that they have been working on it. I haven't been involved in it directly, but I
I
will
don't
pass
think they
it
were
on.
working on it. I think they brought us something and we rejected it. But I
Okay.
wanted to add to it that there is a ability to deal with it without hiring permanent, full-time people to guess where the spike is going to be.
Okay.
So we're saying there's another alternative. Okay. Any other questions, colleagues, on 13? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we just add that as a note to report to the CAO on how you're
We'll
going to
follow up
deal.
with the department, yeah.
Yeah, with those spike in the enterprise fund workforce.
All right, that takes care of all of our open session items. It actually takes us back to the closed session, items
Okay.
1 through 4.
All right. So if we do closed session, can we do that here and not have to go to the back room?
You want to do them here or back room? Dion, where do you?
Okay. Why don't we do them here?